Hey man,
Watch out! It's a woodpecker from space!
Hey guys, welcome to the sculpture. As you can see, I have this has dried overnight. It's gotten some cracking here and there. But today we are going to mask in the sculpture and we're going to try and get the volume up to more workable levels. If you look around the sculpture, you can see it looks almost like a stick figure. And we don't want a stick figure. We want something to be dynamic and kind of bold, but it was important to kind of dry for a day. That way we can work the sculpture and it's not going to be moving around. There's another thing that I'm going to be using to help support the sculpture. When you're doing terracotta based sculptures, one of the things that I recommend you get are these. They're shish kebab sticks, and the reason you use them is that if I need to support the figure, you could actually put something, let's say, down the humerus, and that will support it to the base. It doesn't matter if it's going to have holes in there because we're going to like hollow it out, and even if there's a hole and you connect it throughout, it's not going to explode in the kiln. One of the things I like using is this tool because it's got like this rounded edge, and one of the things, because it's kind of like a small sculpture, so what I do is I add the clay like this and I use this tool to push it down so it becomes one solid unit. And because my clay is also a little bit on the drier side, the one I'm adding, because it's old clay, it's a little bit harder to adhere. But I tend to build this section of the figure much slower than the initial spot, and I still keep it undersized, so I'm not going to go overboard with muscles and any potential detail. It's not about the detail, it's about massing in. So we want to build the thickness, and we're going to build the thickness starting from the ground up. Now I am going to be taking measurements of the legs, the thighs. Everything is going to be in relation, but also keep in mind you want to keep things a little bit undersized as far as the bulk of clay. You don't have to have any detail. You can just take your tool, and this one works really well because I can just round things off even with both sides, but I prefer this side that's concave. I'm going to move this foot slightly to the left and give him more of a stride because his calves are a little bit bigger. So if I move it over, that means that I'm also going to move the thigh. But I'm going to put some sort of clay here just so when it gets wet, it's going to dry out at a more even pace. Add a little bit of clay to the back because it's very thin, and this is going to give me a good starting ground. It's also going to make this section a little bit heavier, and you're going to have to balance it. So this is where I might start putting the skewers. Notice that my hand is holding the body of the figure on the chest, and I'm using my tool here to push down. You need to make sure that the new clay that you put onto the sculpture goes down pretty far because you don't want any sort of gaps in that. In the beginning, it's like it gets too thick, and then you struggle and you have to remove. Every time you remove in a sculpture, it gets a lot more time consuming. One of the things I'm finding about sculpture is that my base is off, and the base is actually going to give you some of the proportions that you need for the figure. So what I'm going to do now is work on the base and get it absolutely right. When you're looking at the figure you need to kind of see where the thigh is, where the hand is, and kind of measure it in between using your eye. But I find that there's quite a bit of problems with this, and I've been adding a little bit of clay on the base, and I want it to be a little bit bigger, and making it bigger will also make the figure bigger as well, because I'm going to be taking measurements from the base, because you know it's a simple square. If you get that simple square right, it's only going to help you. And also, one of the things that I'm noticing that I didn't do before, the base is actually going this way and not square the way it is, but using a knife like this, you can just kind of cut away and make the base the way it should be. And the clay is actually getting a little bit dry. So one of the things you'll be needing is a water bottle with some water. And the bottle that I use, it's pretty standard. And because it really depends on the type of room that you're in, the room that I'm in now actually gets a little bit warm. It's pretty decent. It's a nice studio, but it does get warm, and it's like 90 something degrees outside. So it's better to have a little bit more humidity in the air to keep this type of clay nice and dry, nice and wet. The model that I'm using is quite tan, and darker models tend to be harder to sculpt, and I think that's why a lot of sculptures are made with plaster. It's a little bit easier. Here's one thing that's happening right here. There's a crack developing, so this is very difficult because you have to push it in quite a bit like this. And this is normal because as the clay moves, it tends to do all sorts of things, and because it's so thin. So I'm just going to go ahead and just add a little bit. So one of the things that I have is a shish kebab stick going through the head, because the head has a lot of weight on here, and it's always good to have something to kind of balance it. Now I could put a skewer down the body, but I think I'm going to try not to do it just yet. One of the things I'm doing is I'm taking like lines, just using my eye, drawing them up, and I'm seeing where they hit, and I can see that my gluteus medius, which is a little bit too far out, you can kind of push it in, and we still want to make this undersized. We don't want to make it bigger. I'm going to take one of the shish kebab sticks, and what I do is to kind of figure out where that elbow is towards the back, and I will just kind of slide it in the direction I want it to go. And I'm going to puncture it right through the base. This way, I'll have some stability to sculpt this while it's in there. And eventually, we're going to have to remove it. I'm actually going to break it off here. And one thing I'm doing is I'm trying to sculpt a little bit of the deltoids and where the triceps are. That way I can figure out exactly a little bit more of the proportion. A lot of people kind of get carried away with sculpting something and not coming out the way they see it, but it's not that important to sculpt something the way it actually is in front of you. I want to build a little bit more, because the thinner you have a limb, like a leg, the more it's going to dry out and break. It'll be much more difficult to put together. So here's the heel, and he's got the vastus medialis here, and the thigh is much bigger, so I'm going to add a little bit of clay in between the a little bit more, because so this foot needs to be lifted up because he's got it kind of, and I think that adds a lot of dynamic movement to it as well. And of course the middle part is the heel, and just by suggesting this, that's all you need for a gesture. But you don't want to lift it up too much, because also you want that ability of having it nice and fluid. Also, you want to curve the lower leg, the bones in there. So here, it's kind of important to kind of make this curve probably a little bit more exaggerated. It gives it a little bit more of a different feeling and a lot more elegant. So at this point, this is getting to be kind of complex, but also you want to keep in mind where you want that head to look. You can make it look up, and I think I will do that. It's going to give it a much more interesting view is by looking this way, or you can have him like look down, but I don't like the way the position is on him right now. One of the difficulties of sculpting from a photograph is that it's much harder. Having a model in front of you, much easier if you can afford it. For example, this leg, initially I thought it was curved this way, or say the femur. Always look at the bones instead of the muscles. And it is slightly this way, and I do have clay supporting it. And also keep in mind, if you look at the knee is much higher than what I have the leg. So that means that I'm going to have to push up on this knee and create a little bit of a different style. So I'll take the knife and remove a little bit of this, and then I'll take my extra clay and put it here. But for now, what I want to do is make sure that the knee is higher up than the heel. I do kind of like that idea of it pushing down as if he's a little bit tired. But so far we do have the gesture almost done with this, and in this session we have developed a lot of the mask that we need for the sculpture. And it's kind of funny because this would be the core of the human body, and people should strengthen their abdominals quite a bit because that's how you support your body. Alright guys, this is the second session, and you can see I have masked in quite a bit. There's a lot more physique to him. We're still not done. One of the things I'm shying away is from putting a lot of weight up here, because if you look at it from the front or the back, you'll see that there's so much weight coming onto this side, and what happens is that when you put too much weight, it'll collapse. That is the reason I put this chunk of clay here, and all of this just kind of serves to prop it up so it doesn't collapse. And if you look around your clay, you'll start to see parts that are breaking and cracking. Taking just a lump of clay like this and trying to see if there's places that I can overfill. So there's a crack here because the wood is kind of coming to the surface, and we're just going to put enough clay in here to hold it. Another thing that is happening here is that this is cracking right here, and I mean the arm is completely coming apart because it's drying at a different rate. Take it from the shoulder blade down. You have to make sure you get it absolutely right, and you can see it'll come out here. The other thing I'm going to do is add just a support here, and that's going to keep the clay from drying out and sinking. And I'm going to take a little bit more clay here, and I'm going to prop this up because this is going to dry out, and this is a problem that happens with water-based clay. I do like this part, but because we're working with a sculpture, we need to make it interesting throughout the entire figure and not just one part. You just have to make sure that everything is ready for setting, but this is our second session, And I really appreciate you guys watching. If you have any comments, post up in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer them. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.